I think what turned this whole case has always been DNA. The killer left behind, I believe, part of his DNA.
Over nearly 13 years,
Detective Lou Smith thought that the DNA evidence was crucial. What did the grand jury think about it? And since the grand jury investigation in the late 1990s, there's been a perception that the Ramsey case is a DNA case. You hear that all the time. John Andrews says it, John Ramsey says it, Paula Woodward says it, all the apologists say it. This is a DNA case, and that DNA will basically wash away everything. The ransom note, the footprints, no footprints in the snow nonsense, the stun gun hypothesis, the paintbrush garrote, whatever it is, all the messy, inconsistent statements, the conjecture about not behaving right, it'll cut through all of that and magically produce JonBenet's killer. A little like this.
Somewhere, somehow, there may be a match to that DNA. Then you got your killer.
So easy. So simple.
In 2008, the then district attorney for Boulder, Mary Lacey, decided to do a new round of DNA testing on JonBenet's pajama leggings.
More than a decade later, the items were retested and they found something new. Remember, the previous analysis had already found DNA from an unknown male under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear. Now, this new touch DNA uncovered DNA from at least one unknown male, maybe two, on her leggings as well.
Huh. One male, maybe two. Well, now we're talking again about two potential perpetrators. Now we seem to have DNA evidence confirming that hypothesis.
That's a pretty big thing. That's a pretty clear indication that somebody else was there. You've got DNA now in 3 places on JonBenet's body that doesn't match anybody in the Ramsey family. Anybody. And nobody knows whose it is.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In 2008, when the DA used this evidence to declare the Ramsey family innocent, John Ramsey gave this interview.
We're certainly grateful for an acknowledgement that we are innocent, that this was an intruder, which of course we've always maintained.
Let's watch that again in slow motion and notice how John seems to kind of shake his head a little bit when he talks about an intruder. He also says, which of course blinks, and then says, we've always maintained. I just find that quite interesting. Now, not to play devil's advocate, but if you found evidence of an intruder and you were in this situation with an investigation, wouldn't you make an appeal right there and then to find the killer of your child? He's still out there. We want justice for JonBenet, rather than be grateful to be found innocent. You know, this was 2008. Was there any kind of effort? We want this case to go to trial. We want to catch the murderer of JonBenet. And, you know, for 9 years, and this is 9 years after you've been saying the grand jury found you innocent anyway. And so what you seem to get in this response from John Ramsey is gratitude. I don't know, I would be angry. Wouldn't you be angry that they've been pursuing you for years? You've finally been definitively exonerated. Well, I'm angry and I really want to catch this person that we needed to go after all along. Instead, you get this polite, cordial gratitude. Now, of course, in 2008, this impression simply seemed to reinforce why the grand jury didn't indict. And then, in other words, that the DNA seemed to be the reason. And then in 2013, when we heard they did vote to indict on 4 charges, it seemed to reinforce the reason why Alex Hunter didn't press forward with a trial, because of the DNA. But is that really accurate? Well, why don't we ask a grand juror what they thought about the DNA evidence? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, the recommendations at the end of the video where you see recommended videos pop up, they are not AI generated. They are not YouTube's recommendations. They are my recommendations. the best videos, in my opinion, that you should watch after watching this particular video. So if you would like my recommendations, that's another reason to watch till the end. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, I want to emphasize Amy Robach's words where she says more than a decade later, the items were retested. Retested means they were tested, now they're being tested again. More than a decade later means more than 10 years after 1997, these items were retested. And then they found something new. And then she says, remember the previous analysis had already found DNA from an unknown male under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear. This is quite weird. So in a previous analysis, but way back in very early 1997, they'd already found the DNA from an unknown male.
More than a decade later, the items were retested and they found something new. Remember, the previous analysis had already found DNA from an unknown male under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear.
We really want to look at those words on screen. More than a decade later, the items were retested, right? So they were tested initially, and then they found something new. Remember, the previous analysis had already found DNA from an unknown male under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear. Now, why am I emphasizing this? Well, because the grand jury were also presented with evidence of foreign male DNA. The same evidence they're dealing with here in 2008, the grand jury were shown. And so what did they make of it? And so in order to find out, let's go to this article from the Daily Camera written by Charlie Brennan, the same journalist that appeared in the Netflix series, dated December 16, 2016. And remember the question, the grand jury were also presented with evidence of foreign male DNA. What did they make of it? Now from the article, quote, a JonBenet Ramsey case grand juror on Friday applauded the news that there's to be a new round of DNA testing in the unsolved investigation.
So easy. So simple.
So if you remember, there was foreign DNA found in early 1997 and that sample was fed into coders. What happened? Did they catch the killer?
So easy. So simple.
And then there was a new round of testing that happened in 2008, 16 years ago. Did that lead to anything?
So easy. So simple.
Okay, but what we need now is a new round of testing with modern technology. This would be the third round effectively, and that's going to lead to something.
Then you got your killer.
So easy. So simple.
Huh. Just think about it. With a snap of your fingers, you could solve this case. Right, grand jury? I mean, that's what you guys thought, right? Oh, hang on. Let's play the rest of what the jurors said right after. A JonBenet Ramsey case grand juror on Friday applauded the news that there's to be a new round of DNA testing in the unsolved investigation, but is unsure that it will necessarily lead to the killer's identity. What? Hold on, I thought it's snap and there he is. It's so simple and so easy. The article goes on to note, I'm glad to hear that there will be new DNA testing, said the juror, who offered the comments based on assurance of anonymity. I'm also feeling doubtful that it will bring the killer to justice, the juror said. But I know that other cases are being solved after much time has passed with new technology, so perhaps this one can too. The jury had seen the news on Tuesday when it was reported that following a joint investigation by the camera and 9 News raising concerns about the DNA-based exoneration of the Ramsey family, police and prosecutors are planning to submit certain evidence to the latest generation of DNA testing. The jurors said, I was happy to see that it's moving forward, but not that hopeful of a resolution. Now, why do you think these journalists and the Ramseys are so hopeful, and yet the juror who heard all the evidence for 13 months isn't? The article goes on to note, until now it has never been known to what extent DNA evidence, far less advanced in the late 1990s than it is today, had influenced the jury's decision-making process. So here we are at the pertinent question at the 10-minute mark. If you're listening at this point, well done. But now you need to... So what are we asking here? Let's put those words on screen. How did the DNA evidence influence the jury's decision-making process? And here's the answer. Not very much, according to this juror. To me, it seemed like the DNA evidence was just inconclusive. I don't remember it playing a major role in our discussions, because what did it mean? The juror said it didn't seem to include or exclude anyone. Now, I think that part's also very interesting in that he says it didn't seem to exclude anyone. And of course, this is exactly what an independent investigation led by 9 News and the Boulder Daily Camera found, that the DNA evidence, this new evidence, was at best inconclusive.
Killed JonBenet.
It's certainly possible that an intruder was responsible for the murder, but I don't think that the DNA evidence proves it.
The only way I can describe this evidence is uninformative. It really is, it's not dispositive of the presence of a perpetrator. There is foreign DNA, but that foreign DNA can easily be accounted for by a number of innocent mechanisms.
One of those innocent mechanisms could be if JonBenet's clothing was taken off and she was redressed, and there's a strong theory in terms of that, because what she was wearing was the wrong size. And in the coroner's report, it appeared that, I think it was mentioned that fluid was diluted. It did appear that she had been wiped down. So if clothing is taken off, put it on the floor, and then redressed, and in the carpet is male DNA, then that DNA could easily be in multiple places, which is just how touch DNA can transfer. And we do know JonBenet was placed on a carpet in numerous places in the Ramsey home. So I guess it's not snap of the fingers and...
So easy. So simple.
Meanwhile, and this is where it gets really interesting, the same grand juror briefly laid out several reasons central to why the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. Number 1, no evidence of an intruder, no footprints in the snow, no physical evidence left behind. And you would imagine that it includes the DNA as part of that. No absolute proof of physical evidence left behind. That foreign DNA could belong to anyone. Well, so can you see that even the Boulder grand jury accepted that there was snow and no footprints in the snow? Who on earth would say on a blue sky day that it didn't rain? And so in the same way, who on earth would say there was no footprints in the snow if there was no snow? Obviously there was snow at the time that they saw it, at dawn. Again, despite what Lou Smith says, the story we hear over and over and over again is different when the grand jurors are allowed to speak. Then let's go to another of those several reasons central to why the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. Number 2, the location of the body in a hard-to-find room. That was also confirmed by the housekeeper. Number 3, the ransom note written in the house with weird personal information and never a ransom call. How can the ransom note be legitimate if no one calls to collect the ransom? And if JonBenet isn't taken to begin with, JonBenet has been in the house the whole time. And then number 4, the juror, after rattling off these points, I'm not telling you these points, this is what the grand jurors said, why they thought based on the evidence that was led over 13 months, why they thought the Ramseys were guilty. And then he posed a question. And this is a really important question. Let's have a loud booming noise before we deal with it. The juror, after rattling off these points, then posed a question, a rhetorical question. How much evidence is there really that this was a sex crime? And I don't think he's saying that sex was irrelevant, but how much evidence of this intruder crime, the sexual predator crime, is there compared to the counter possibility? Now, I do believe there was sexual interference, but it is really interesting that after hearing all the evidence we are not privy to, that the grand jury seemed to, in a sense, minimize the sexual aspect, not rule it out, but certainly not rule it in as the work of some depraved sexual predator that you hear when you hear Lou Smith speaking, that you hear when you hear Team Ramsey speaking. This monster you hear about endlessly from the Ramsey playbook. And then there's also this, The killer was in the house for hours between the blow to the head and the strangling. Now, there is a theory that a significant length of time passed between the head wound and the ligature, and it's, I believe, in this area that the grand jury got it wrong. It's always dangerous and tricky to differ from a medical examiner, but in this case I do think it's justified. To differ, I mean. I could be wrong, but I suspect the medical examiner either based this theory on a police theory or vice versa. And we know, or we ought to know, that the police theory that Patsy killed JonBenet is mistaken. We also know from what the housekeeper said that she firmly believed the grand jury were going to indict Patsy, which of course they did, just not for the crime she imagined. I don't know exactly what the science is, but I imagine that there could be a certain amount of post-mortem swelling on the brain which may have clouded the coroner's findings, and just some preliminary checking in this area does seem to bear this out. Yes, it is possible for the brain to swell after death. I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do want to close with a seldom seen clip of John Ramsey speaking at Lou Smith's funeral. I think when a suspect or victim and a detective become friends like this in this way, can you really expect a reliable or credible investigation? Because all investigations need to remain independent.
It's very much an honor to be here to celebrate Lou Smith's life and to share my thoughts with you. I'm John Ramsey. I had the opportunity to visit Lou a week before he died. Remarkably, during that time together, Lou talked a lot about the case. He hadn't given up. He never gave up.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check the recommendations in the outro, and I'll see you guys next time.